People only become dangerous when everyone believes the same lie. The first photograph appeared on a Monday morning. By lunchtime, it had spread across every local news station, every social media feed, and every neighborhood conversation. In the picture, I stood quietly behind the tall wrought iron gate surrounding the Hayes estate. My hands rested lightly against the cold black metal, while autumn sunlight filtered through ancient oak trees behind me. My expression looked distant. My posture looked resigned. The caption beneath the image told the world everything it wanted to believe. The mysterious young woman living inside the mansion of Adrian Hayes had finally been seen. The comments arrived faster than anyone could read them. Some called me a hostage. Others insisted I needed to be rescued. Strangers debated my life with complete confidence, even though none of them had ever spoken to me. They believed the gate had trapped me. They never wondered why I was standing beside the only entrance that opened from the inside. My name is Claire Bennett, and the story everyone believed about me contained exactly one truth. I did live inside Adrian Hayes' estate. Everything else was wrong. Every morning I woke before sunrise, walked through the quiet stone hallways carrying a cup of coffee, and unlocked the estate library where hundreds of rare books waited beneath towering shelves of dark walnut. I spent my days preserving fragile manuscripts, restoring handwritten journals, and cataloging historical records that had survived for generations. Dust floated through warm beams of morning light, while soft classical music echoed gently from an old record player in the corner. It was peaceful work. Meaningful work. The kind my father had loved long before I ever learned how to repair cracked leather bindings or faded ink. Outside those library windows, however, another story was unfolding. Television vans parked beyond the estate walls. Camera lenses pointed toward the entrance from across the road. Reporters waited patiently beside the sidewalk, hoping I would appear again. Whenever I crossed the courtyard carrying books between the library and the archive building, someone photographed me from a distance. Every ordinary moment became another dramatic headline. They never photographed the open gates every morning when local gardeners arrived. They never photographed children visiting the Foundation Museum on weekends. They never photographed the volunteers leaving freely every evening. They only photographed me. Shortly after noon, I carried a stack of restored journals across the central courtyard. The fountain sparkled beneath clear blue skies while colorful autumn leaves drifted across the stone pathways. I heard footsteps approaching before I looked up. Adrian Hayes walked toward me wearing a charcoal suit beneath a long dark coat, a leather folder tucked beneath one arm. His expression remained calm, almost thoughtful, as always. He slowed beside me and glanced toward the front gate where another camera lens reflected sunlight through the iron bars. "They are back," I said quietly. Adrian followed my gaze before nodding once. "Yes. Do you ever think about explaining the truth?" He looked at me for a long moment before answering. "People rarely believe the truth before they are ready to question the story they already chose." He gently accepted several heavy journals from my arms, making them easier for me to carry. Neither of us noticed the camera hidden beyond the trees capturing that exact moment. By evening, the newest headline appeared across every major news website. The feared Mafia Boss had been photographed escorting his silent prisoner deeper into the estate. I stared at the article on my laptop, then quietly closed the screen. If the world believed that was shocking, they would never be prepared for what I was about to discover hidden inside one forgotten book the following morning. The next morning began exactly as every morning had since I arrived at the Hayes estate. The eastern sky glowed with soft shades of gold while cool autumn air drifted through the open library windows carrying the scent of fresh rain and old cedar trees. I unlocked the heavy walnut doors, switched on a single brass reading lamp, and placed my coffee beside the restoration table before the first rays of sunlight reached the towering bookshelves. Hundreds of rare volumes rested quietly around me, each one carrying another family's memories across generations. Preserving history had always felt simpler than explaining the present. Outside those walls, another wave of rumors continued spreading through the city. I refused to read them anymore. Instead, I concentrated on repairing a 19th-century collection that had recently arrived from a private archive. One leather-bound volume immediately caught my attention. Unlike the others, it carried no title across the spine. Dust covered the faded green binding, and the edges of its pages had darkened with age. According to the inventory record, the book had belonged to my father years before his passing, yet I could not remember ever seeing it in our family home. Curious, I carefully placed cotton gloves over my hands and carried the volume toward the restoration table beneath the brightest window. As I slowly opened the brittle cover, something unusual happened. A folded envelope quietly slipped from between two pages and landed on the polished wood with a soft sound that echoed through the silent room. My heartbeat immediately quickened. The envelope had yellowed with time, but my name remained perfectly clear across the front. Claire. Nothing else. I stared at the familiar handwriting without moving. I recognized it instantly. My father's handwriting had always leaned slightly to the right, elegant but unmistakably personal. For several long moments I simply looked at the envelope resting beneath the morning light. Then I carefully opened it. Inside rested a single handwritten letter dated almost 8 years earlier. My hands trembled as I began reading. If you are holding this letter, then circumstances unfolded exactly as Adrian and I feared they might. Before you believe anything you hear about him, remember one thing. The safest place for you may someday become the place everyone else misunderstands. I stopped reading. The words blurred for a moment, as emotions I had buried for years quietly returned. My father had written Adrian's name long before I ever met him. Long before the newspapers labeled him with frightening headlines. Long before anyone imagined I would one day live inside this estate. I continued reading. There will come a day when people believe you are trapped. Do not waste your strength trying to convince them otherwise. Truth has its own season. Until that day arrives, trust a man who carries this promise after me. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. I quickly folded the letter and slipped it back into the envelope before looking toward the doorway. Adrian stood there holding another stack of archival documents. He did not step inside immediately. His calm blue eyes met mine, and for the first time I wondered how many years he had quietly carried a promise that never belonged to him. He noticed the old envelope resting beside the open book but said nothing. Instead, he gently placed the documents near the entrance. I thought you might need these today, he said quietly. I looked from the letter back to him. Did my father know this would happen? Adrian remained silent for several seconds before answering. He hoped it never would. Before I could ask another question, a house attendant hurried into the library carrying a tablet with visible concern. She looked toward Adrian first, then at me. There is someone outside the front gate asking specifically for Miss Bennet, she said. He claims he is an investigative journalist, and he says he came here to help her escape. For a moment no one spoke. The house attendant remained near the library door waiting for instructions while morning sunlight continued drifting across the old wooden floor. I looked toward Adrian, expecting him to refuse the visitor without hesitation. Instead, he calmly closed the archival folder in his hands and asked a single question. Is he alone? The attendant nodded. Yes. He introduced himself as Daniel Carter from an investigative news network. He says he believes Miss Bennet is being held here against her will. Adrian thanked her quietly before she left the room, closing the heavy library doors behind her. Silence settled around us once again. I held my father's letter a little tighter. You already knew someone would come eventually, did you not? I asked. Adrian walked toward the tall windows overlooking the front courtyard where the black iron gate stood beyond rows of ancient oak trees. Through the branches I could barely make out a news van parked along the road. Rumors always attract someone looking for proof, he answered. The only question is whether they are searching for the truth or for a headline. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it into the inside pocket of my notebook. Should I speak with him? Adrian turned toward me. His expression remained calm, neither encouraging nor discouraging. That decision belongs to you. His answer surprised me even though it should not have. Since arriving at the estate, he had never once told me where I could go, who I could meet, or what I should say. The world imagined locked doors while I spent every day making my own choices. I walked toward a small walnut cabinet near the reading table and quietly unlocked its top drawer. Inside rested several neatly arranged keys attached to simple brass tags. One tag read Front Gate. Another read Archive Building. A third opened the East Service entrance. I picked up the front gate key and held it in my hand for several seconds before placing it back exactly where it had been. Adrian watched without saying a word. "You leave it there every morning," I said softly. He nodded. "Because it belongs where you can reach it." Before I could respond, the telephone on the librarian's desk rang once. Adrian answered briefly, thanked the caller, and returned the receiver to its cradle. "The reporter has asked for 5 minutes," he said. "Nothing more." I looked toward the windows again. Beyond the gate stood a man holding nothing except a notebook and a small voice recorder. He appeared patient rather than aggressive. Curiosity slowly replaced my hesitation. "I will speak with him," I said. "Only if you truly want to," Adrian replied. "Not because anyone expects you to." A few minutes later we walked through the quiet courtyard together. The fountain reflected the bright autumn sky while colorful leaves drifted across the stone pathway beneath our feet. As we approached the entrance, Adrian stopped several yards before the gate and remained there. He made no effort to stand beside me. He simply gave me space. I unlocked the iron gate myself and stepped outside. The reporter looked relieved the moment he saw me. "Miss Bennett," he said gently, "I came because people believe you cannot leave." I glanced back once. Adrian remained exactly where he had stopped, his hands resting calmly inside his coat pockets. Then I turned toward the reporter with a small smile. "You have already made one mistake," I said. "I opened the gate myself." The reporter looked past me toward Adrian, then back at the key still resting in my hand. Confusion replaced certainty across his face as he quietly asked the question that would change everything. "If you are free to leave," he whispered, "then why have you chosen to stay?" The reporter did not ask another question immediately. He simply stared at the brass key still resting in my hand as though it contradicted every sentence he had prepared before arriving at the estate. A cool breeze carried golden leaves across the sidewalk while cameras remained pointed toward us from the opposite side of the road. Their operators waited for a dramatic rescue that never seemed to arrive. Instead, they watched two people standing quietly beside an open gate. "May I ask you something honestly?" Daniel finally said. I nodded. "If no one forced you to stay, why would you choose to live here when the entire city believes this place is dangerous?" I looked back toward the estate. Morning sunlight rested gently across the stone courtyard where volunteers were arranging flower beds near the fountain. Beyond them stood the library windows reflecting soft light across shelves that held centuries of history. "Because danger and misunderstanding are not always the same thing," I answered. Daniel lowered his notebook slightly. His expression shifted from confidence to curiosity. "Then why not tell everyone?" he asked. I smiled faintly. "Would they have believed me yesterday?" He did not answer because we both already knew the truth. A single statement rarely changes a story people enjoy believing. Daniel followed my gaze toward the library before speaking again. "There must be something inside that building worth protecting." His words lingered in the quiet air longer than I expected. At that moment Adrian slowly approached the gate, stopping several feet behind me without interrupting the conversation. Daniel noticed him immediately. "Mr. Hayes," he said carefully, "would you be willing to explain your side?" Adrian remained composed. "Explanations only matter when someone is prepared to listen." Daniel looked from Adrian back to me. "Then perhaps I am finally listening." Adrian reached into the leather folder he had been carrying since morning and removed a cream-colored invitation embossed with dark blue lettering. He extended it toward Daniel without stepping closer. "Tomorrow afternoon," he said, "the Hayes Historical Foundation will host its annual trustees meeting. You may attend as our guest. Nothing will be hidden." Daniel accepted the invitation with visible surprise. "You are inviting a journalist into the estate?" Adrian nodded once. Truth does not become weaker when someone observes it. Daniel thanked him quietly before leaving the entrance, his earlier certainty replaced by thoughtful silence. The television crews slowly packed their equipment, disappointed that no dramatic rescue had unfolded before their cameras. As the last news van disappeared beyond the hill, I locked the gate again and slipped the brass key into my coat pocket. Adrian noticed. "You forgot to leave it in the drawer," he said with a small smile. "I only borrowed it," I replied. We walked together through the peaceful courtyard toward the library. The fountain shimmered beneath clear afternoon skies while the old oak trees whispered gently above us. Once inside, I returned the key to its familiar place inside the walnut cabinet and closed the drawer. My eyes wandered back toward my father's letter resting safely inside my notebook. "There is something I still do not understand," I said quietly. "My father wrote that you were protecting more than me." Adrian remained silent for several moments before walking toward one of the tallest bookshelves in the library. He gently pressed his hand against an old carved wooden panel hidden between two shelves. A soft mechanical click echoed through the room. Slowly, almost silently, the entire section of bookshelves began moving aside, revealing a narrow stone staircase descending beneath the library floor. Cool air drifted upward carrying the unmistakable scent of ancient paper and cedar. Adrian looked toward me with the same calm expression he had worn since the day I arrived. "It is time," he said softly. "You deserve to see what your father trusted us to protect." The narrow stone staircase curved gently beneath the library, each step carrying us farther away from the noise of speculation and closer to a truth that had remained hidden for decades. Small brass wall lamps cast warm pools of light across smooth limestone walls, revealing careful craftsmanship that had survived generations. The air felt cool and carried the unmistakable scent of cedar, aged paper, and polished oak. Adrian walked a few steps ahead without speaking, allowing me to absorb every detail in silence. At the bottom of the staircase, the passage opened into a remarkable underground archive unlike anything I had ever imagined. Long rows of handcrafted wooden cabinets stretched across the chamber, each carefully labeled with names, years, and locations. Glass display cases protected historical journals, sealed family correspondence, architectural blueprints, photographs, property deeds, and countless handwritten records preserved with extraordinary care. It looked less like a secret vault and more like a private museum dedicated to memory itself. Soft lighting illuminated every shelf while a quiet ventilation system preserved the fragile documents from moisture and time. I slowly walked toward the nearest display case and immediately recognized my father's handwriting again. His journals rested beside several leather folders marked Bennett Family Collection. My chest tightened as I carefully traced my fingertips across the smooth glass without opening it. "He worked here," I whispered. Adrian nodded. "For nearly 12 years. I turned toward him in disbelief. "He never told me," Adrian answered gently. "He believed you deserved a childhood free from responsibilities that belonged to another generation." My eyes wandered across the room until they settled on a large wooden table positioned beneath an elegant reading lamp. Several folders already rested there, neatly arranged as though someone had prepared them long before today. Adrian stepped beside the table and carefully opened the first folder. Inside were preservation agreements, charitable trust documents, museum restoration contracts, and legal correspondence signed by respected historians, attorneys, and nonprofit organizations. Every page demonstrated years of patient planning rather than secrecy for personal gain. "Your father and my grandfather created this archive together," Adrian explained quietly. "Their goal was simple: protect cultural history that private collectors wanted to separate and sell piece by piece." He opened another folder containing architectural drawings of the estate, historical photographs, and restoration records dating back almost 70 years. "Many people see this estate as a fortress," he continued. "In reality, it became a secure home for collections that legally belonged to educational foundations." I looked around the vast chamber once again. Everything suddenly appeared different. The walls were not hiding wealth. They were protecting history. "Then who wants these records?" I asked. Adrian remained silent for a brief moment before sliding one final folder across the table toward me. The cover carried a familiar corporate logo I had seen countless times in newspapers. Hawthorne Development Group. Beneath the logo rested a recent proposal requesting ownership of the estate through a large redevelopment project. Attached behind it were legal challenges questioning the Foundation's rights to preserve the archive. They are not interested in restoring history, Adrian said. They want the land beneath it. I slowly turned another page. Detailed construction renderings replaced photographs of the library, gardens, and museum. Luxury towers stood where the historic estate currently rested. Public gardens had disappeared beneath parking structures. The chapel had become a reception hall. Every trace of the Foundation's educational work had vanished from the drawings. My father's final letter suddenly made perfect sense. The safest place had never been protecting me from Adrian. It had been protecting all of us from losing something that could never be replaced. Before I could speak again, a discreet notification sounded from Adrian's phone. He glanced briefly at the screen before looking back toward me. Daniel Carter accepted tomorrow's invitation, he said calmly. And according to his message, he is not coming alone. Someone from Hawthorne Development has asked to attend the trustees' meeting as well. The following afternoon arrived beneath clear blue skies and a gentle autumn breeze that carried golden leaves across the front courtyard of the Hayes estate. By noon, the historic chapel beside the library had quietly transformed into the annual trustees' meeting hall. Long walnut tables displayed carefully organized Foundation reports, preservation records, architectural restoration plans, and handwritten journals protected inside crystal-clear archival cases. Fresh white flowers decorated every corner, while sunlight streamed through towering stained glass windows, covering the marble floor with warm patterns of amber, sapphire, and crimson light. The atmosphere felt formal but welcoming, more like a gathering of historians than a meeting surrounded by public curiosity. I stood near the entrance greeting guests as they arrived. University archivists, museum directors, preservation experts, local educators, attorneys, and longtime trustees exchanged warm conversations while volunteers offered coffee and fresh pastries. Every visitor signed the attendance register before taking a seat. Nothing about the afternoon suggested secrecy. Everything reflected transparency. Daniel Carter entered precisely at 1 o'clock carrying only a notebook and a thoughtful expression. Gone was the certainty he had worn outside the gate the previous morning. Instead, curiosity guided every step. He thanked me quietly for allowing him to attend before taking a seat near the center of the chapel where he could observe everything clearly. A few minutes later, another guest arrived. Victor Hawthorne, the chairman of Hawthorne Development Group, entered wearing an impeccably tailored navy suit accompanied by 2 attorneys carrying leather briefcases filled with documents. His smile appeared polished, confident, and perfectly practiced. Adrian greeted him with calm professionalism before inviting him to join the other attendees. There were no raised voices, no visible hostility, only respectful formality. Once everyone had settled into their seats, the senior trustee, an elderly woman named Eleanor Grant, welcomed the gathering and opened the annual review of the Hayes Historical Foundation. For nearly an hour, directors presented restoration projects, scholarship programs, educational partnerships, museum attendance reports, and community outreach accomplishments supported by the Foundation. Daniel filled page after page with handwritten notes. Victor remained patient, though I occasionally noticed him glancing toward the large archival display positioned near the front of the chapel. Finally, Eleanor invited Adrian to present the final agenda item. Adrian stood slowly and walked toward the central display case. Many questions have recently been asked about this estate, he began calmly. Today we will answer them with documents rather than opinions. He carefully unlocked the glass case and removed several original agreements signed decades earlier. One by one he placed them beneath a document camera projecting every page onto a large screen for every guest to examine. Foundation charters, preservation contracts, property trusts, educational partnerships, independent legal audits. Every signature had been notarized. Every transfer had followed state law. Every historical collection belonged legally to the nonprofit foundation rather than to Adrian personally. Daniel looked up repeatedly from his notebook, visibly surprised by the growing mountain of evidence. Victor's confident expression slowly became more reserved. Then Adrian reached into the final archival folder and removed another document sealed inside a protective sleeve. "There remains one final misunderstanding," he said quietly. "It concerns Miss Claire Bennett." The entire room fell silent. Adrian turned toward me without speaking another word. Instead of addressing the audience himself, he simply handed me the document. My hands trembled slightly as I looked down. Across the top of the page appeared my father's signature beside Adrian's, followed by a single handwritten sentence that immediately stole my breath. "Claire alone will decide when the truth belongs to the world." For several long seconds I could not move. My father's signature rested at the bottom of the document exactly as I remembered it from childhood birthday cards and handwritten notes he used to leave on the kitchen table before leaving for work. The familiar curve of every letter carried me back through years I thought had disappeared forever. Around me, the chapel remained completely silent. Every trustee, every guest, every attorney, and every journalist waited without interrupting the moment. Adrian stepped back instead of standing beside me, quietly giving me the space my father had requested years before. I slowly lifted my eyes from the document and looked across the room. Daniel Carter sat with his notebook resting unopened on the table. Victor Hawthorne watched carefully, his confident expression now replaced by patient uncertainty. Sunlight continued flowing through the stained glass windows, covering the marble floor with warm colors that somehow made the entire room feel calmer than it had only minutes earlier. I took a slow breath before speaking. "My father never taught me to fear powerful people," I began softly. "He taught me to pay attention to the choices they make when no one is watching." Every face remained fixed on me. "For months people have believed I was living here because someone refused to let me leave. That story spread because it sounded dramatic. The truth is much quieter." I placed my father's document carefully beside the foundation records so everyone could see it. "The gate has never been locked against me. The front door has never required permission. Every key inside this estate has always been available to me." Daniel lowered his eyes for a brief moment before writing a single sentence across his notebook. I continued. "The first morning I arrived, Adrian showed me where every exit was located. He told me I could leave whenever I wished. He never asked me to stay. The decision was always mine." Several trustees quietly nodded. Eleanor Grant smiled gently, remembering those first difficult days. "I stayed because my father trusted this foundation," I continued. "He believed history belongs to communities, not to whoever offers the highest price. He believed promises should outlive the people who make them. I stayed because preserving truth sometimes requires patience." I turned toward Adrian. He remained exactly where he had been standing, his hands resting calmly behind his back. He did not interrupt. He did not defend himself. He simply allowed my voice to become the only one that mattered. I looked back toward the audience. Many people called this estate a prison. I understand why they believed that. They saw walls without seeing what those walls protected. They saw security without understanding responsibility. They saw one photograph and imagined an entire life. A quiet silence settled across the chapel once again. Then Daniel slowly stood from his chair. "Miss Bennett," he said respectfully, "before today I believed I had come here to rescue someone." He paused before offering a small apologetic smile. "Instead, I discovered someone protecting something far greater than herself." His words echoed gently through the room. Victor Hawthorne remained silent. The confident smile that had accompanied him into the chapel had disappeared completely. Eleanor rose from her chair and thanked every guest for allowing the foundation to present the original documents openly. As the meeting prepared to conclude, Adrian walked toward the entrance and quietly unlocked the massive wooden chapel doors. Warm afternoon sunlight flooded inside, illuminating the entire room. He stepped aside without saying a single word, leaving every door completely open before turning back toward me with the same calm expression he had carried from the very beginning. For the first time since this story began, I realized the world had never misunderstood where I lived. It had misunderstood why I chose to remain. The days that followed changed the conversation across the city more quickly than I expected, yet not in the way dramatic headlines usually do. Instead of publishing another sensational story, Daniel Carter released scanned copies of the Foundation documents, historical preservation agreements, and my father's handwritten statement alongside a detailed report explaining everything he had witnessed inside the estate. He wrote about open doors instead of locked gates. He described community scholarships instead of secret meetings. He published photographs of museum volunteers, restoration experts, school children touring the library, and elderly trustees carefully preserving history for future generations. For the first time since my photograph had appeared behind the iron gate, people began asking a different question. They no longer wondered why I could not leave. They wondered why they had believed I could not. One quiet afternoon I walked through the museum galleries with Eleanor Grant as visitors slowly returned. Families studied restored journals inside glass cases while university students copied notes from historical exhibits. Children paused beside an interactive display explaining how damaged manuscripts were carefully repaired page by page. Their excitement reminded me why my father had devoted so much of his life to this place. Eleanor smiled warmly as she watched them. "Truth usually walks more slowly than rumor," she said softly. "But it often stays much longer." Before I could answer, Adrian entered the gallery carrying several newly framed preservation certificates that had just arrived from the State Historical Commission. Volunteers immediately gathered around him with genuine appreciation rather than fear. He greeted every person by name before helping position the certificates along a restored stone wall. Nothing about the moment resembled the image the public had imagined for months. It simply looked like people working together. Later that afternoon, Daniel requested one final interview before returning to the city. This time we sat together beneath the old oak tree overlooking the estate gardens instead of meeting outside the front gate. There were no television cameras, no bright studio lights, and no crowd waiting for dramatic sound bites. Only 2 chairs, a small recorder, and the peaceful sound of birds drifting through the autumn air. Daniel smiled before switching on the recorder. "If you could change one thing about how this story began," he asked, "what would it be?" I thought about the question carefully. "Nothing," I finally replied. He looked surprised. I continued quietly. "If people had never misunderstood the situation, they might never have looked closely enough to discover everything this foundation protects. Sometimes a misunderstanding opens the door to a much greater truth." Daniel nodded thoughtfully before asking one final question. "What about Adrian?" I glanced toward the gardens where he was helping volunteers plant young maple trees along the stone pathway. His sleeves were rolled neatly to his forearms, and he laughed quietly as one of the children proudly showed him a newly planted sapling. People judged him before they ever watched how he treated others. I answered. That was never his greatest mistake. It was ours. Daniel switched off the recorder and thanked me sincerely. As evening approached, he shook Adrian's hand before leaving through the same front gate where he had first arrived, believing he was about to rescue a prisoner. The iron gate remained completely open behind him. I stood there watching the sunlight settle across the long driveway until the news vehicle disappeared beyond the hills. Adrian walked beside me without speaking. Neither of us needed to. The loudest accusations had faded away, replaced by something much quieter and far more powerful. Respect had finally begun growing where suspicion once lived. Then a volunteer hurried toward us carrying an official envelope marked with the seal of the County Preservation Board. Eleanor accepted it, read the first page carefully, and looked up with an expression I had never seen before. "There is one final decision," she said softly. "And both of you need to hear it together." 6 months later, the Hayes estate no longer attracted television trucks or curious strangers hoping to glimpse a mystery that never truly existed. Instead, school buses arrived every week carrying students eager to explore the museum, attend preservation workshops, and discover the remarkable history that generations had quietly protected. The front gate remained open from sunrise until sunset, welcoming visitors from every corner of the community. The same iron bars that had once inspired thousands of false assumptions now framed smiling families carrying guidebooks, children pointing excitedly toward the restored gardens, and volunteers greeting every guest with genuine warmth. On a bright October morning, I stood beside the entrance watching another group of students walk through the gate with wide eyes and endless questions. None of them asked whether I lived here against my will. They wanted to know how old the library was, who restored the ancient journals, and why the estate had become one of the most respected educational foundations in the state. That change felt more meaningful than any public apology ever could. Eleanor Grant joined me carrying the official county envelope that had arrived months earlier. Inside rested the final preservation designation recognizing the Hayes Historical Foundation as a permanently protected cultural institution. No future redevelopment proposal could erase its archives, museum, gardens, or educational programs. The legacy my father had helped build would continue serving future generations exactly as he had hoped. Eleanor smiled gently before placing the certificate into my hands. "Your father would be proud," she said quietly. I looked toward the library windows where warm morning sunlight reflected across shelves filled with carefully restored history. "He already gave me everything I needed," I answered softly. "He taught me that truth does not need to shout in order to survive." Later that afternoon, Adrian and I walked together along the familiar stone pathway leading from the chapel to the front gate. Volunteers trimmed flower beds while children laughed beneath the young maple trees we had planted together months earlier. Everything felt peaceful in a way that could never have been captured by headlines. As we reached the entrance, I noticed the old brass key resting inside the small wooden cabinet beside the gate exactly where it had always been. I picked it up for a moment, turning it slowly between my fingers before smiling. Adrian noticed. "You still keep checking," he said. I nodded. "Not because I need to leave." I carefully returned the key to its place. "Because it reminds me that I always can." He smiled with quiet understanding. Neither of us reached for the key again. We simply stepped through the open gate together and paused on the public sidewalk overlooking the peaceful estate. Families continued entering behind us while others left carrying books, photographs, and new memories. Every person crossed the same threshold freely. I turned back toward the estate, remembering the photograph that had convinced an entire city I was trapped. The gate had not changed. The walls had not moved. Only the truth had finally caught up with the story. I looked at Adrian and laughed softly. "Do you know the strangest part?" He raised an eyebrow. "What is that?" I glanced once more toward the open entrance where another child waved happily before running toward the museum. "Everyone thought they needed to rescue me," I said. "But the only thing that was ever imprisoned was the truth." We walked back through the gate without hesitation as warm autumn sunlight filled the courtyard behind us. I finally understood that freedom is not measured by how easily you can leave a place. It is measured by knowing the door has always been open, and choosing with complete confidence exactly where your heart belongs.